Hello and welcome to episode 3, Building Sustainable Creative Media Ecosystems in Our Olympic Boroughs. This podcast is brought to you with support from University College London and is co-produced between Dr. Anne Preston and Liza Fletcher with studio production by Robin Billingham. Episode 3, Building Sustainable Creative Media Ecosystems in Our Olympic Boroughs. In episode 3, we delve into the imperative for larger media companies and cultural organisations in and around the boroughs to actively engage with East London's local community. Our panel discusses the potential for collaboration between local creatives and big media players, highlighting the mutual benefits of partnerships that leverage resources, expertise, and networks. We also identify areas where additional support and resources are needed to empower creative entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities. But before we start exploring exactly what that means, I would like to ask each participant to introduce themselves and say a little about their organisation and role. So Dr. Anne Preston from the School of Culture and Creative Industries.
Yes, so hi, I'm Anne. My title is Associate Professor of Interdisciplinary Practice and Media Communities, which is quite a long-winded sentence, but I'm actually the programme lead of UCL's undergrad BA Media and also work at the UCL East campus on an array of different projects, and I'm really interested in doing sort of community engaged projects where we're kind of connecting our new campus in East London with sort of surrounding organisations.
What about Barry Flanigan from Aurora Media?
Hello, great to be here. So I'm Barry, I'm Chief Strategy Officer at Aurora. We're a London-based production company. We make content all around the world in more than 30 countries, I think, in the last 18 months. And we make everything from Formula E motorsport to Olympic programming to wildlife shows for BBC Studios. And what runs through everything we do is it's all about storytelling. It's all about creating great stories around sport and culture that resonate with a fan audience. And really excited for this discussion because as part of what we do, encouraging up-and-coming young creative talent that we can work with both on our doorstep in London and around the world is something that we're very passionate about.
Gus, do you want me to use doctor in your title?
If you wish, you
Yes.
don't have to.
And finally, Dr. Gus Casely-Hayford from V&A East.
Hi, it's great to be here. I am the inaugural director of the Victoria and Albert Museum East, which is a brand new museum and collection centre, which is in 2 buildings on the East Bank site. And it houses about 280,000 objects, 1,000 archives. And it is not just a new V&A, but a new way of thinking about how we offer access to our collections. And we're enormously excited about it. And to some degree, the content of this conversation is core to what drove us here, thinking about how we build really sustainable, deep relationships with the people of East London.
Thank you to our contributors. So topic 1 in this conversation, we're looking at the Olympic legacy and how it's provided a new home for new consumers of culture. In the first episode, we spoke to cultural leaders to talk about developing new audiences for culture and ensuring that traditional communities in the Olympic boroughs were not being left out of cultural activities. So I'd like to just explore what is your take on the success of the Olympic site since 2012? And please, can you tell me a little bit about how your organisation prioritises communities And what's your proudest achievement for involving new audiences for culture in your output or employment practice within your organisation? So, Gus, given that you've just talked about engaging with new communities as part of your core strategy as one of the centres of culture on the East Bank, can you tell me a little bit about the strategy for involving those communities who don't normally get engaged with cultural activity or creative industries around the Olympic boroughs?
Well, the big draw of coming to East London with our collection was East London. You know, that this isn't just another part of another city, that there's something very special about this area. Across history, this has been the place that has given us some of the most influential and inventive creatives. You know, this is the place, to, just about, in every medium, there are incredible people, from great photographers like David Bailey to incredible fashion designers like Alexander McQueen. And we felt that this would be a really good place to invest in creating not just a new space, but to also reinvest in the original driver for the V&A, which wasn't just as a museum, but was as a creative crucible that was there to really create opportunity for artists and designers. And so we have created here not just a museum, but we've brought our collection, and we want local people to feel like it is there for them, that it is a toolbox that they can tap into and they can draw upon for their own kind of purposes. And one of the things that I was very keen as the director in the 4 years that I've been in post before we actually opened, because we opened over the spring of this year, is to get out beyond our spaces with our collections into the schools. I visited more than 80 schools personally, taking our collections out there, but also we've done huge longitudinal projects in many of the communities locally, trying to both build relationships, but also to tap into the huge well of creativity in the 4 boroughs, and to build the kinds of sustainable relationships that we hope, beyond the point of opening, will really flower and blossom in our spaces themselves.
That's creating relationships is key, isn't it, for getting the message out there and just to bring new people in that, traditionally would never see themselves going into a museum. I run a community film festival in Walthamstow, and when we've had screenings at the BFI, some young people have emailed me to ask, do I have to wear a suit there? And it's the expectations of people who don't normally engage with culture, what their expectations are, but engaging with it on their terms as well. And I wonder, Anne, I'm going to come on to you next. It was really interesting to talk about the engagement with schools and communities that V&A East has done. Can you tell me, I know that UCL has been engaging with schools, community groups and CICs in the area. Can you tell me some of the projects that you're most proud of?
I think what's been really good since UCL East has kind of popped up, I think similar to the V&A, we started before the building popped up, actually. So I think with a lot of the organisations on the East Bank, and it's the same with UAL, they're already had ways of organising and projects with kind of East London. I think what it's done for UCL is be able to sort of consolidate that a bit more and make it more longitudinal. I think one of the things is with UCL is that we now have kind of partner schools that we work with. We don't have lots and lots of schools, but we have a smaller number that we consistently work with, so we can have I say, that relationship building. So then it becomes less sort of, a one-off thing. So I think I'm quite proud of the way that UCL, has been quite, being quite thoughtful in how it does that kind of schools outreach and engagement, to think what is the best impact. Teachers are really busy, so should we come in and do something? It's sometimes it's not just looking at it from your own perspective. I think that's one of the things I've learned about kind of doing outreach. I think another thing is, I don't necessarily speak for everyone at UCL, is the way that, speaking of museums, when this building, Marshgate and 1 Poole Street came up, we knew that it was going to be, lots of the spaces were open. Obviously it's a university, you need to be a student to access the specialist spaces because you study here, but there's also more open spaces, and I think UCL also didn't want it to appear like a museum. It was actually, that kind of thing. So maybe we're sharing that, the idea that, it's people's preconceptions about a museum. You go in there and there's a load of old stuff and you can't touch it. And it's full of people who are like really knowledgeable about those things, and you're allowed to come and look at it, but a bit more than that. So we did, because it would be easy, I think, to build. UCL is, Bloomsbury campus does look like a museum because it's very old and it's beautiful, but we didn't sort of, I think the idea was that we didn't want UCL East to look too much like a museum.
You need to visit some museums, is my suggestion, because I don't think museums look like the museums that you possibly.
Well, maybe then maybe I represent a portion of the population that have old-fashioned ideas about museums.
Yeah, because museums, the way in which you're talking about museums is not the sort of come and visit.
Yeah.
When V&A East opens, its storehouse, come and see what we're doing.
I would love to. Yeah.
But this, in terms of architecture, it is one of the most thrilling spaces I've ever been into.
Wow, okay.
Genuinely, that the architects, they've actually called out the centre of an existing building, filled it with glass, and 280,000 objects, glass floors, glass balustrades. If you stand in the centre, you will be able to, if you were to pirouette round, see 280,000 objects, 5,000 years of the story of human creativity through the finest objects that have ever been created, all surrounding you.
That sounds amazing. I want to go.
We all want to.
And it is fascinating that you described us, the way that a place can shape the way people experience culture and people and the democratization of that process, so opening it up to maybe people that wouldn't traditionally experience that. And I love that whole theme of physical space impacting what people think emotionally about what they're looking at.
I suppose that's what I was thinking, is that the campus shouldn't look like an intimidating space.
No. Yes, but museums may contain old things.
Yeah.
But the institutions don't necessarily, in the presentation of their objects, represent old attitudes.
You're right.
And I think that's the key point, isn't it? Yeah. Old doesn't mean old ways of thinking. It's
exactly.
It's fascinating.
From what I understand, I went to one of the open days to the V&A storehouse. What I love about the approach is that people are invited in to touch, to look at items, to talk with the curators. So you're not just reading, material about it. It's a conversation. And I think that's refreshing. And just giving UCL an opportunity to big up itself. I think, the way that UCL are providing bursaries for people who, traditionally they're the first people in their family to go to university, and they're from the Olympic boroughs. I mean, that's really refreshing as well, and supporting them through their academic journey. It's the same sort of conversation, bringing new people with fresh perspective into that environment. Yeah. So Barry, last but not least, I mean, talking about culture in this way for your company is a slightly different model, but I guess the way that people engage with your company in terms of your employment practice and the way that people commission from you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is where this is a fascinating conversation, is that the two sides of my company come together in this theme. So we are a content producer, so we make content, we make stories, and we want people to care, whether it's sport or a cultural film that we're making. We want to tell stories that resonate with people and make them care. And that flow has to flow into the way that we find creative talent, and we bring the people behind the camera or the people that we're employing, because one of the massive flaws in the old world, I say, of the production industry, was that there's really a lack of representation in creative talent. There has been in the past, that people tend to get employed because they know somebody. You start as a runner, you get you work your way up, but it tends to be, in the past, it's quite often been quite a narrow section of society, let's say, that are employed within the creative industries. Now, that's not just something that morally doesn't feel right. It's actually to the detriment of the creative output, because at Aurora, we need to tell stories around sport, for example, that resonate all around the world. In order to do that, we need a breadth of creative thinking within the company. And that's why I think, bringing it back to what's happening here in this place, that link between the people that live here and the special nature of the site that you described, Gus, where you've got sport, fashion, culture, lifestyle, you've got all these elements that are kind of living together side by side with the people that live here in one place. For us, that's an incredible initiative to support. We want to tap into that sort of creative hub, and I think the site here has moved from a regeneration site into a genuine creative engine, which is why we've been very excited to establish relationships with the UCL team. And Anne and I have been working with others in the UCL team to provide mentorship places and placements for students. We work with other organisations in London and around the world to give that type of access to a broad range of creative talent, because we're in a privileged position where we can give that access, and not to make it just a box-ticking exercise and giving somebody a placement for a few months and then they go away again, to genuinely help people develop.
That's really refreshing.
Develop their careers and give them the amazing opportunities that we have around this, creating all these incredible stories and content, and to bring them into that. But we're not just doing that out of the goodness of our heart. It is really important to us as creative producers that we broaden the range of thinking and the range of talent that we're working with.
That really speaks to me, Barry, because I worked in broadcasting. I worked for ITV in the 90s.
So you know exactly
I know exactly what you're talking about. And in Waltham Forest, I run a CIC that supports young people from underrepresented backgrounds.
Yeah.
Into entry-level roles in film, TV, creative industry. So I understand the barriers that some people face. They could be amazing visual storytellers or creatives, but their dad doesn't know someone in the BBC, and their mum, can't introduce them or give them the car so that they can be at Elstree at 5 a.m. for a shoot.
Yeah.
We're coming from a completely different foundation place here, and talking about CICs and and social enterprises and the access they have to this pot of talent.
Yeah.
I mean, it actually brings me on very nicely to a point that came up in episode number 2, which we kind of subtitled Bridging the Gap. And we looked at how community grassroots groups are reaching out to new audiences and are, introducing them to the Auroras, the V&A East, the UCLs that are based around the campus. So we spoke to creative entrepreneurs and small businesses who were CICs, community interest companies, or social enterprises, and they felt that they were undertaking a really important role in bridging the gap between the East London partners and the marginalised communities who always get overlooked, to bring diverse groups into the creative industries. Now, I worked for a broadcasting charity that represents disabled talent, and we said at the time it's so important to have people from disabled talent groups, from minority ethnic backgrounds and older women into broadcasting, because, look at the droves of young consumers of TV that are going onto YouTube and social media. You need diverse people within your workforce, don't you?
Well, exactly. And I think what's interesting at this point in time in media and content more broadly is the old, but there's such change on the audience side, like the old ways of consuming things. Like a younger audience doesn't watch linear TV. They don't. That's not where they're finding content. That's not where they're connecting with content creators and stories. And they're finding that content and consuming that content in very, very different ways. So if the media industry does not change and adapt and evolve in terms of how it works, who it works with, what talent it brings in, then it will be dead. Like companies, old broadcast companies would be in a position where they do not understand the audience that they're trying to reach, and that audience will go elsewhere. They will stop interacting with those type of legacy broadcast companies. And it's
interesting, isn't it, that all our terrestrial broadcasters now have streaming services, and they have YouTube channels, so they're sort of racing to catch up. And and the other aspect, just to bring it back to some of the things we were talking about around culture, is the way we make a lot of sports content in particular. And today, particularly for a younger audience, to turn somebody from just watching something into a fan of what they're watching it's partly about the action on the pitch or the track or on the stadium, but a lot of it is actually about the character-driven storytelling around the sport, and that really overlaps into adjacent cultural passion points. So you pick a sport like football, for example. That overlap with fashion, style, gaming, entertainment is now as much a part of a young fan's experience as what's happening on the pitch. So that's leading also for companies like ours just to think about diversity of thinking and how do you tell these stories. So it's not just people that understand sports production, it's people that actually understand character-driven storytelling. And it's leading us into some very interesting partnerships and places with other organisations. And again, bringing it back to this place here, that's why I love what's happening in Stratford and the broader area, because you've got these pillars: sport, fashion, culture, lifestyle, all living and working side by side, which is really fertile ground for us as a content producer. So yes, we should talk about some partnership opportunities. And Gus, that's sort of saying so much about the V&A, because I know when you go there, and it's Anne's traditional idea of going to look at things in glass cabinets versus some of the amazing exhibitions that I've seen there around David Bowie, around Cartier, different ways of looking at collections. And I think I'd like you to reflect a little bit on what Barry's spoken about, this idea of storytelling and the way that different communities engage with culture. Because I mentioned before, I heard an amazing programme where you visited a museum in Australia that had engaged with different community groups. And I heard you say that, what you have in your vision is yourself as a 12-year-old boy wanting to go to the V&A East. And, there's a lot of communities around here which probably hold Anne's view that why would I want to go Why would I want to go to a museum? I'm wondering if you could reflect on the storytelling, engagement with communities, and that 12-year-old Gus coming to the V&A East.
Yeah, but one of the really heartening things that I've found over the course of the last 4.5 years that I've been in post has been in taking our objects into schools. And the objects that we've taken have not been the sort of traditional things that museums take into schools, which is like a kind of second division collection that was particularly made for that purpose. That we have taken objects that would otherwise or may otherwise have been in cases that these are absolutely kind of exquisite things that tell very important chapters of our stories.
What sort of objects?
Well, things like one of the things that, I'll give you a couple of examples. One was last year. I was enormously proud to be part of one of the institutions that returned objects to Ghana. And these were objects that were taken when Ghana was the Gold Coast in the 1870s by force. British invading troops who landed on the coast there, and within a few weeks had burned the capital to the ground, captured the king and taken his treasury. And some of those objects came back and went to the British Museum. Some came to the V&A, and last year we returned those objects on permanent loan, because that is, in terms of the terms in which that we actually hold them, as much as we could do. But in advance of that, I was able to take some of those objects into schools in East London, and I would stand in a class or in an assembly and look out at lots of faces of young people. And we talk about the gentrification of this area, but if you go into many of the schools in places like Newham, stand in an assembly, and the demography of those schools, it tells the story of a nation that has had huge impact on the world, but also been impacted by the world, and that you will see people, from every area of the world, but particularly from sub-Saharan Africa. And for them, telling these stories was enraging, powerful. They both felt kind of, a sense of the injustice of history, but also they felt represented and able to talk about how it made them feel. And I think for museums, not avoiding these difficult, contentious areas of history is important. And for taking these objects back into schools and to being able to tell these stories and giving them the actual opportunity to hold these objects, to get up close to these objects. They weren't in cases. And to say, do you know who these objects belong to? Not to me, but to you, to all of us. And do you know who these histories belong to? They aren't just mine to craft. They are all of ours. And that this is a time in which we must craft new chapters of these histories together. And we took a whole range of objects, many of which resonated with young people in similar ways. And there were a whole array of different reactions. But there were reactions, and that was the thing, is that museums aren't sleepy, tired places in which people just go to sort of, to spend the quiet after. These are places where you can go to be inspired, outraged perhaps possibly, but potentially to have transformative experiences in which you might make that transition from being a passive viewer to thinking about how you might want to get involved and change the world, or maybe yourself think about what your professional opportunities are. It could be that in some point in the future, you are one of the creatives that we will show in our spaces. And so it was glorious having the privilege of taking these objects, but even more glorious hearing the reactions of young people, reflecting on what they said, and making sure that we took the advice that they gave us and have actually incorporated it into every area of our delivery.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
And again, it's that theme of it's not just the object; it's all the stories around the object, and how do you by almost like separating the barriers between somebody that would be interacting with an object. You're actually bringing the object to them in their environment. You're encouraging them to talk about it, and it's not like a one-way lecture is what I'm hearing. It's like a dialogue.
Yes.
I think really, really powerful, and there are parallels with what we do around building fandom. It goes back to what I was saying. It's we talk about sometimes like traditional sports broadcast. There's literally a glass screen between the presenters of the broadcast and the fans outside in the stadium, and a lot of what we try to do in our content creation is get rid of that barrier. It's tell authentic stories of fan culture, and within sport, those layers of storytelling are usually about identity and community. Like, why do you become a fan of a sports team? It's quite often because you're immersed in all those layers of storytelling, or it says something about your identity. And we've made a lot of content and stories like that, because ultimately as human beings, that's what inspires people, as you said, Gus. It's what makes us want to lean into something or feel that we're going to be what make us think that we want to create something ourselves. And I love that. It's that theme of get rid of the barrier between the audience that you're trying to reach and the thing that you're trying to talk to them about. It should be a dialogue, immerse the audience in what you're saying.
I suppose what that says to me as well is, as an East Bank partner, we say East Bank partners, our physical spaces happen to be on the East Bank, but we're not actually, that doesn't define. We are in, we have our physical location there, some of our everyday business is done there, but actually it's about going out, and it's not just about inviting people into our physical spaces as well. So maybe that's some of the things about the blurred boundaries again. It's actually good to blur those boundaries. So I see what you're getting at, Gus, when you're talking about the V&A East now. And Barry, I think that is really well reflected.
Yeah, and it's that sense that, again, some of what we're talking about, there is something special about this area, and it's rooted in London, but it's also rooted in the world. There's people from all over the world, from backgrounds from all over the world that find their way through various ways and means into East London, and that's been happening for centuries. And I think I do find it really fascinating that these stories from all around the world can find a place and a home here. So to your point, and it's not just about talking about what's happening in East London and the Olympic boroughs. There's stories that are told here from this site that are actually relevant to communities around the world. Really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I have been fortunate enough to work with students on projects where we go out to the community and create documentaries, and I've been working with the master students in immersive storytelling and making virtual reality. So you watch the documentary in a headset and step into the world, be it a social housing estate in Leytonstone or the community around Hyams Park, another place in Waltham Forest, or go down Walthamstow Market and, talk to the vendors, the people who use it, and delve into the history of it. And I loved what you said, Anne, about going out to communities, which I think UCL does, quite well. I think it could probably do more to go out to communities, but I know it does lots of creative projects with communities. And something that came up in episode 2 was that the social entrepreneurs and CIC directors were talking about the prospect of UCL doing a mapping exercise or something like an event where these content providers, companies that do projects with communities and lots of other creative but socially focused projects, they would like to see something like, an event where they could sell their services, maybe to Aurora, maybe to V&A East. And I know one of the companies that I spoke to was Media Rights, and they say that UCL support them because you recognise that they employ young people who normally wouldn't get an opportunity to work in media. Have you ever done a mapping exercise or an event where you've engaged with the grassroots community interest companies? Have you ever done, has UCL ever done a research project looking at these companies who are bridging this gap?
Well, funnily enough, I had a student who do last year. It was quite a small scale project, but who was mapping mentoring schemes in East London as part of as a research project, and she wrote a report around this about what mentoring is available, what are the gaps, and she created a little website. That was just a small project because I was thinking, what's a nice, neat project for a student to do in a few weeks that she could learn from. That's actually, I didn't have pots of money to run it or pay her, but it did make me think more about the fact that UCL and other, let's say, privileged institutions, do we need to, for me anyway, as an academic in one of those institutions, is to rethink how I'm actually doing community engagement. So, and is it more about this facilitation? And I know probably people have talked for years about this idea of brokerage and brokering, but I really do feel that universities as educational institutions, as institutions full of expertise, could be playing, thinking about it as applied to East London, is playing a bigger role in actually brokering those because of the social capital that we have. And obviously, we don't have money to burn, but there are projects where we can apply for money, and those projects should be about facilitation and connecting people more than perhaps us saying we've got some expertise and we can give you those expertise.
And I think that would be, as somebody who's working in industry, so to speak, that would be, I think it's about partnership. And as you know, Anne, we've discussed it in other conversations lately. I'm quite passionate about how companies from industry can have a massive role to play here, because we can provide access, we can provide opportunities. And I think it's important for us to then partner with institutions that can do that connection, that can create those pathways. Because I think if we're putting out, a job advert, for example, or a placement opportunity, quite often it's really difficult. We'll put something out and then you're sort of overwhelmed with responses. And I think if we can partner with organisations that can help create pathways into the community, the role we have to play is we can then provide opportunities to bring on young talent. So I think there could be, I think there could be a lot more partnership between universities and industry, or partners within industry or other organisations, to just create the pathways that you're talking about. And I think the CIC layer is really important as a connecting layer, just to be able to reach out into communities, make people aware of opportunities or understand the creative talent that's there. And then, if we can find the right pathways to then bring people along, that's got to be the benefit of everybody, I think.
Yeah, because for me, it's just about, should the East Bank partners look more at CICs and social enterprises in the practices that they're doing, and that kind of dislodges that power dynamic. So they don't have to be the main players. Their names aren't necessarily going to be on everything. Yeah. They sort of,
Yeah, to avoid it, again, it's as you said, Liz, it's all about, from a community perspective, particularly young people, like how would they know quite often where to start or even what the roles are? I mean, I work in production and we find a lot of young people just wouldn't know, what does a producer do? What does an editor do? What does a media manager do? And to just that outreach to help inspire people with what's actually there, in the way that Gus described from your perspective, going into schools and explaining and helping to inspire through objects. I think we can create these pathways that help young people understand what's there and then what they do next or who they go to next.
But simultaneously, we're in a moment of seismic transformation in lots of different creative sectors, and so much of the innovation is actually happening beyond the establishment.
Yeah, totally. And that's the irony, isn't it?
We might kind of feel that reaching out is something which will be beneficial to those smaller institutions or communities. But it may be the other way around, because the in the way in which you were speaking about how some of the sort of mainstream broadcasters have been somewhat left behind by some of the sort of the streamers that across almost every area of sort of creative production, there have been similar sorts of evolution in terms of digital implementation of creative. And I do think that there is a lot for us as big institutions to learn about the ways, particularly the flexible and the dynamic ways in which creatives are working in those spaces. And they no longer have to have those old-fashioned conduits for the distribution of their skills and knowledge. They can go direct. And I think, to some degree, that we need to find the ways of relinquishing a little bit of that power and a little bit of humility, so that we can work with some of those creatives in more mutually beneficial
and you're right,
ways.
it is across different verticals, from broadcast media to culture to lifestyle. The old ways of doing things are sort of collapsing. Or fragmenting, I suppose, is a better phrase, and it's to the benefit of established organisations to have that diversity of talent or creative talent that actually understand how to create great stories, how to create great content, and now have an opportunity they can go direct to an audience. In sports content creation, somebody could be reaching an audience on TikTok, building millions of fans, and there are many instances of content creators doing this, and completely bypassing traditional media organisations. And the media organisations are now scrambling over themselves trying to understand that behaviour and that type of working. So it's to the benefit of established organisations to find the right way of bringing in that sort of creative talent.
I have to bring up the dirty subject of money and funding there. Because, if we look at, let's say, marginalised communities who want to get into a profession or work in a creative way, or they want to go to uni, or they feel like they're a great filmmaker, but they just don't know how to take the steps. I think the frustration, from previous contributors was that if you're a social entrepreneur or a CIC, those traditional funding pockets of money, somebody like myself who, runs a company with a young board of emerging talent who keep me on the ground and make sure what I do is relevant to young people, I'll be up against, somebody whose job it is a fundraiser and development officer within a council, and then up against a food bank. And I mean, how can you make...
Or maybe even a university.
Or a university, So, it's very difficult for funders to make those, terrible decisions about, who's going to have the most impact, who's going to, really make a difference to the future of an individual, of a particular form of training, or in a cultural aspect, have an arts project that will inspire someone to move into a creative role. So, I'm coming into the third topic and final topic of today, and I asked all of you to reflect on success stories and future plans, a sustainable future. What does it mean from your business's point of view? But also, I think, funding is a really essential part of this. You're nodding, Barry, so I'm going to come to you first.
Look, you're spot on. And ultimately, where does the money come from? Where does the funding come from to enable some of the initiatives that we're talking about? And I think for me, again, that's where that partnership model. Like we shouldn't be asking people to make funding decisions between a food bank and a sort of creative community outreach program. And I do wonder that there are sources of funding, certainly within industry and within the private sector, to tap into investment schemes that are, as we've just described, are to the benefit of those organisations. And if we can find the right pathways where that money can flow through into a layer of encouraging community-driven creative talent, and there's obviously a bit of a minefield there. So, for example, brand sponsorship in sport is a very large area of investment that puts money into the sporting ecosystem. There are ways where brands potentially would want to invest and back community-driven creative schemes. Now, the minefield is you've got to make sure that the brand is appropriate to the scheme. But if we don't have these sort of partnerships, then how that money will not flow into that type of investment. And again, I'm very passionate. I see in the sports industry how much money is in the sports industry, from media rights through to brand sponsorship, etc. It's a very, very lucrative industry. And for me, I think it is really important, and it is imperative for that industry to find ways that some of that funding flows through into encouraging young creative talent across all sorts of different sectors to find ways to contribute to that community. Because ultimately, sports is about building fandom, and they're trying to build fandom in these communities. So it is not a good situation if the money's locked over here and the community you're trying to reach is over here. There must be ways that we can find find schemes that allow some of the investment, some of the money that occurs within the sports industry to find its way into more grassroots and community-driven initiatives, which is where the partnership model comes in.
I think there's a lot, and particularly if you're young at the moment, to feel frustrated about and perhaps even a little bit depressed. But I do think in this country that this is one of the things that we have done well at. I mean, I look at our Olympic legacy and, one compares it to many other nations, and that,
there genuinely is a legacy.
Visit Rio and see kind of, a lot of their old Olympic infrastructure is now just kind of, it's abandoned. It's just kind of tumbleweed blowing through. But what we did here was not just to invest in the existing post-Olympics infrastructure, but was to encourage a new generation of institutions to come here. And we were encouraged, subsidized to do so on the basis of delivering on this very thing. That is why we were here. This is what the Olympic legacy is really most palpably driven to deliver, is about how do we make a difference for those kinds of local, mid-scale, small-scale, individual creatives who are really embedded in these communities, because these are the communities over hundreds of years who have driven innovation, success, inventiveness, all of the things that we think about when we think about Britain and feel proud are to do with our incredible creativity. And so often that creativity has been something which has been about individuals driving uphill against the kind of ambient wind. And what we are doing in East London at this very moment, I think, is shifting the wind. So I hope it's behind their backs, and that the institutions, their responsibility, the reason why we are here is to make sure that we get behind those institutions. So if you look at the demography, the profile of the staff that we are employing at V&A East, but also across the Olympic sites, the programme that we are focusing on, the people that we are foregrounding and platforming, it is celebrations of those very things and that kind of expertise. And it's not just done out of a kind of East London vanity. This is the engine. These are the answers that I think post-Brexit, 21st century, post-pandemic, in a world that is invested in equity and thinking about the future and sustainability, this is what we have to deliver upon. It's about equitable, thoughtful, development and innovation that will make us all feel proud. And so I feel it may well be that there is skepticism about gentrification, that there is kind of concern about investment into the same old institutions, but the drive, judge us in 5 years' time upon the criteria that we were encouraged to come here based upon, which is delivering for those communities and making sure that we make the difference that they would want to see.
Well said. And,
Wow.
well said. And what a brilliant example. In fact, the best example of what I was talking about the role that what is the role that sports can play in bringing investment and bringing pathways to local communities. So that what you just described is something that started in sport. The biggest sports event in the world came here, but unlike a lot of failures in the past, there was a genuinely a plan and implementation process to then make sure that there was a legacy that came from that sporting event, which created pathways for the community to then, an organisation such as yours, Gus, to come here and to continue that spark that had been lit. And I think that and across sports more broadly, it is a really, really important and valuable model that could be replicated the world over, but too often isn't. Sporting events turn up, lots of money is spent, broadcast rights deals get done, the world comes to a certain place to watch something for a period of time and then goes away again. But here is a brilliant example of how to, I think, in a very powerful way, create that legacy that actually is rooted in the community. So yeah, well said. I wanted to give Gus a round of applause.
Definitely. Barry, you'll be pleased because today, it's very hot in the studio, so I've just got my shirt on now, but I wore my William Morris inspired Walthamstow FC top.
I love it. I know
this
that.
Is an example of how William Morris, who's one of our greatest design assets in Walthamstow, has inspired as a kit for the local football team.
But it is, but that link between sports and fashion and culture, it's a really, really strong way of building fandom and building fandom at a community level.
Yeah, well, there are definitely William Morris fans. We get coachloads of ladies in tweed skirts coming to Walthamstow to go in the William Morris Gallery, and all the schools go in there and make a piece of art or a personal accessory, or they learn something about Morris, and not just his designs, but also the way that Gus was saying, how designers go against, the theme of their time and, into craft and creativity.
So if a sport or a team or a sporting brand is, is trying to bring people into a sport or create a fandom, it's all about, come back to what we were saying earlier, that this layer of storytelling that can be rooted in the community where the sporting event is happening, and that actually make what's happening on the pitch or the track just matter that much more to people. And I think the more we can actually have that happen, not by chance, but it's actually planned and thought about. And as a legacy, I love everything that we're talking about is like, how can sporting events and brands and teams leave a legacy with the community where the activity is taking place.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask the final question now, Anne. I think Gus and Barry were talking before about 2040 and how London's going to make a bid for the Olympics in 2040. So we've got our eyes on the future. And like Gus rightly said, I think, the East Bank partners and the London Olympic Legacy Organisation can be delighted about what's been achieved here. It's totally transformed this part of East London. But I want you to think about what the sustainability of the future looks like, because yes, we have enjoyed success with the retail part, with the sporting, with the cultural and the educational partners that are involved in the East Bank. But when you're thinking about a sustainable future, what do you, on behalf of UCL or you personally, define as sustainability? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on a sustainable future looking ahead.
I think from a personal perspective, things I've been involved in have made me think this is probably the best this is a really sustainable way forward, is, again, I'll just go back to the idea of physical buildings. So we have this physical building, it's got great facilities. In terms of the creative communities, what I've found is, since I've been working at UCL East and having my networks, is and what kind of university or an educational, as well as offering bursaries and scholarships, which I think is great, and I coordinate that scheme, and I know the people, and sometimes, people just need a venue to show a film, and somebody just needs to be there and not try and take the credit or put it on Instagram, but just literally be around to let that person in and to provide a venue for free. That can be a stepping stone to something else.
That's a big help to a young filmmaker or a community association. Yeah, definitely.
So, obviously sustainability is a big word, and I don't know whether it's going to be the same in 2040. Maybe people won't be going to cinemas anyway. But that idea about, if we're going to build buildings like this, and yes, we're building it, and it's all linked in with a financial kind of situation where students pay to come and we deliver education. But aside of that, is just providing the spaces. But I think within that, then we need people working in the universities that can be there to be on hand for that. And currently, I don't know, I would love for UCL to think that it could have new kinds of, create new kind of roles or positions. Like some universities have kind of community fellows, they're actually from the community and they exist to do that. So it's less about kind of outreach officers or widening participation officers. So providing just, a simple providing spaces, and then providing people who can, be on hand to, sort of allow people to use those spaces. It's quite simple. It's just going back to the basics, really.
Yeah, I love that idea. But as somebody who organises a film festival and brings people together to watch short film, I really hope that in 2040 there still will be cinemas.
No, I
will be watching films together.
Because I think the common thing, the thing that undergrounds us and underpins us as human beings is not just that we want to create, but it's also that we want to do it together, that we want to share these things. Yeah. And it may well be that the digital space allows us to do that in really dynamic ways. But simultaneously, what it reminds us of is how important it is to be in spaces like we are today, where you can actually look fellow human beings in the eye, and that you share that thing that, particularly in the areas of culture and academia, are so important, which is the shared humanity that underpins so much of creativity. And, to be in a space together is, I think, the thing that makes that truly resonate.
So, Gus, for you, sustainability, is it always connected to a physical space when you're thinking of the future? And
not always, but I think community is something which the digital has enhanced. But what it has reminded us of is that as human beings, that thing that I think we nurtured in our very kind of earliest gestation period was what it is to share a physical space with someone, perhaps a stranger, and to build a kind of relationship that is impossible unless you are there. And I think, that is something which makes museums, auditoria, shopping centres, spaces where we can come together as human beings and be reminded of what it is to be human, which is to make those kinds of connections. And that can happen in sports stadia. It's great to watch those things on television, but to be there is really, truly special. And so I hope, over coming decades, that V&A East will become a space that people, of course, they'll want to visit online, but they'll want to visit in person even more.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, Barry, we were talking about sustainability earlier, and you had a very innovative approach to it where it impacts on technical deliverables and the way that content is made. I was just wondering if you could reflect
absolutely.
on that.
And actually links to what Anne and Gus was saying,
Yes.
that by creating these spaces where people can come together, creative ideas happen, great creative ideas happen. And I think with technology and production now, there's brilliant opportunities where those creative ideas can come to life in ways that production talent can be telling stories for the whole world rather than just stories that are local. So we've got a scheme, we call it our Global Creator Network, where we tell stories of sport and culture around the world with young up-and-coming filmmakers in the places where we're trying to tell those stories about. So it could be football, and we've told stories of women's football in India, the role that football played in the Canary Islands in helping people rebuild after a natural disaster, the story of the Algerian national team, and we told wildlife stories around the world, and without sending anybody on a plane anywhere. And we've done that through technology advancements that enable us to produce content with local, authentic, up-and-coming filmmakers in the places that we're creating content from. And I think if we invest in what Gus is talking about, these places and spaces that creative talent can come together, that talent can be used around the world. It doesn't just have to be used in this space. Like, people here could be creating brilliant storytelling for brands, media organisations, production companies all around the world. And I think that would be a truly brilliant legacy.
That really resonates with me, because my master's was in anthropology, and this idea of the anthropologist going to a community and trying to describe them to them. I think it makes more sense to collaborate and have storytelling that comes from the community, from the people that know it best.
Yeah, exactly. And so again, it's not just to do that for reasons of sustainability. It actually benefits the storytelling because it's more authentic and it's more genuine. But in order for those sort of things to happen, I totally agree with what Anne and Gus are saying, that it's really important that we provide the spaces and the places where creative talent can come together and can create together. And whether that's in the real world or extending that with virtual digital presence. But if we don't create these spaces, it's very difficult to create in isolation, I think. So, really important that we properly invest in these spaces.
Amazing. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you for one sentence to just reflect on our discussion today and give me one sentence or phrase about what you found most useful and something that's inspired you in your work that you will take into your next project. And sorry to pick on you first.
I know. Well,
it's the last one, and then I'm going to let you go.
Yeah. I think maybe... I've said it before, sort of blurring boundaries, particularly from being in a university, but you're kind of in your own bubble to some extent sometimes. You're surrounded by very similar people with the similar thing in mind, So blurring, I think the positive, like blurring of boundaries.
Now, Gus, you've made us all feel very positive today about, the things to be really proud of and the things to celebrate around this area. Is there anything you wanted to add or reflect on as a result of the conversations today?
Well, I think one of the great pleasures of my job is having the time to spend with young people, particularly in schools. And despite all of the challenges and the obstacles that we've thrown at them as a generation, I haven't just been inspired by their generosity of spirit, but also by their invention and their determination. And we look at the world and you read a newspaper and it is very difficult not to feel somewhat depressed and frustrated. But if there were any generation that seems ready and with the ideas to take on the challenges that our generation have bestowed them, it is this one. And they are armed with an anger as well, which I think is going to really help to unlock things. And so I look to them and, I do feel not just great hope, but great inspiration.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for your inspiration today, Gus. Barry, last but not least again.
Well, yeah, again, building on what Gus was saying, I think what I'm taking away from this conversation is the power of storytelling to really inspire and activate communities and engage communities. So to take on some of these big challenges that Gus was referring to. And that storytelling becomes richer the more we can encourage young creative talent into the industry to tell those stories for the benefit of society, particularly from underrepresented communities, and that's to the benefit of all of us.
Thank you. Well, it just remains for me to say thanks again to our guests today. Thanks again to all the support from UCL for making this project possible. Special thanks to our studio director, Robin Billingham, and to our production coordinators, Chloe and Poppy. And most of all, thanks to our guests, Dr. Anne Preston from the School of Culture and Creative Industries, Barry Flanigan from Aurora Media, Dr. Gus Casely-Hayford from V&A East, and goodbye from me, Liza Fletcher. Thanks, everyone.